According to Ukrainian media, at the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion last year, most Ukrainians considered the USA, followed by Poland, as Ukraine's top two allies. 573 days later, that alliance has started to fracture.
Mamy trochę do czynienia tak z tonącym. My jesteśmy tym, który ratuje. Jak jest tonący, każdy, kto kiedykolwiek brał udział w ratowaniu tonącego, czy każdy, kto kiedykolwiek uczył się o tym, co dzieje się w tej sytuacji, wie o tym, że człowiek tonący jest niesłychanie niebezpieczny, ponieważ może pociągnąć w głębiny. Ma siłę niewyobrażalną na skutek obawy osobistej, wpływu adrenaliny i może po prostu utopić ratującego. Chwyta się wszystkiego, mówi się przecież w przysłowiu, tonący brzytwy się chwyta. Rzeczywiście tonący chwyta się wszystkiego, czego się da. Trochę to jest taka sytuacja jak dzisiaj między Polską a Ukrainą. Czy trzeba działać tak, żeby się obronić przed uczynieniem nam szkody przez tonącego? Oczywiście, że musimy tak działać, żeby się obronić przed uczynieniem nam szkody przez tonącego, bo jak tonący doprowadzi do szkody i nas utopi, to nie dostanie pomocy. W związku z powyższym to my musimy pilnować tutaj swoich interesów. To jest przede wszystkim nasz obowiązek i będziemy to robili skutecznie i zdecydowanie.
To Zelensky when he comes to the Capitol on Thursday. He wants more money from Congress. He claims that he says it's very important to stopping the war in Ukraine. What message does it send that so many conservatives are opposed to more money for Ukraine?
The first thing I'll tell you is there's no money in the House right now for Ukraine. There's just not. It's not there.
You mean there's no support for money?
No. And to be blunt, we're running a $2 trillion deficit. Any money we give to Ukraine, we're borrowing from our future. That's the facts. Those are the truth. You feel how you want to feel about it. I'm here to tell you what's right and what's real. Look, it's not a good time for him to be here, quite frankly. That's just the reality. And the third piece is what's happened with Ukraine is frankly the fault of leadership of Joe Biden. Let's be very clear of that. So don't put that on the backs of the American people now. If we had a commander-in-chief who knew how to lead as opposed to take naps, then we would be in a much better situation when it comes to Ukraine and global security for that.
Meanwhile, the Biden administration's own Joint Chief of Staff, General Mark Milley, continues to give the public overly optimistic and even misleading pronouncements on the current progress of the Ukrainian counteroffensive.
This is a defensive series of belts that the Russians have put in with complex obstacles, minefields, dragon's teeth, barbed wire, strong points, and so on and so forth. It's a defense in depth. And generally speaking, the Ukrainians have penetrated several layers of this defense.
What?
It is not 100% penetrated yet, but they've penetrated several of the layers. And they're going very slow, preserving their combat power, and very deliberately through this defensive belt that stretches the entire length and breadth of Russian-occupied Ukraine.
So just to be clear, in Zaporizhia, where the main thrust of the Ukrainian counteroffensive is occurring, Russians have built as much as 3 layers of defense. And General Mark Milley claims that Ukraine has breached generally several layers of defense. So let's put that pronouncement to the test. So the New York Times reports that since Ukraine launched its counteroffensive in June, the Ukrainian forces have breached the first line of defense in some Russian positions along the southern line of advance. It continues that Kiev's forces have recaptured the tiny village of Robotny, a tactical victory that highlighted the enormous challenges that lie ahead. Progress has been grueling and slow. In some weeks, troops have moved only a few yards at a time along this line of advance. And let's get some military expertise to explain the current situation in the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And here we have Scott Ritter, a former U.S. Marine and Chief Weapons Inspector for the United States of America Army.
Scott, is there any evidence that the Ukrainian troops have pierced, impregnated, or even reached the three rings of defenses that the Russian military and its outside contractors erected along the fault line between Ukraine and eastern Ukraine.
There's some evidence that north of the village of Robotyno, in the direction of Verboye, and I might be saying that village wrong, so I apologize for anybody who don't take my pronunciation of Russian language to the bank. But in the direction of Verboye, there was the initial line of Dragon's Teeth, and there's some evidence that Ukrainian reconnaissance units, dismounted infantry, have crossed over and have advanced towards a tree line in that area. They're being slaughtered as we speak. No Ukrainian vehicles have gone through. And the Dragon's Teeth, of course, aren't designed to stop infantry. They're designed to stop armored vehicles. And no Ukrainian armored vehicles have reached it. No Ukrainian engineering units have come to break these obstacles apart. The obstacles are doing what they're intended to do, to stop an armored advance and force Ukrainians to go forward with infantry, where they're being slaughtered as we speak.
These realities, which Washington assiduously attempts to hide from its domestic audience, leads foreign media outlets to report on the frontline situation quite differently. Asia Times frames it this way as of yesterday, which, by the way, is the same day the New York Times article showing Ukrainian penetration of Russia's first defense line south of Robotyny. But Asia Times says that a real breakthrough did not happen, and Ukraine chewed up most of its strategic reserves. It says two important brigades, the 25th Air Mobile and the 82nd Air Assault, lost so many men and so much equipment in the Zaporizhia front, much of it supplied by NATO, that they became, and I quote, combat ineffective and were withdrawn. The article continues. The Ukrainian offensive continues to grind on, consuming more equipment and manpower. Reports say that Ukraine is losing, and I quote, more than 1,000 men a day, sometimes close to 2,000, with little to show for it. And while most of the fighting is focused on Russia defending territory in Donbass, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Crimea, Asia Time reports that Russian leaders are now talking more and more about replacing the Ukrainian government and expanding the war to key cities such as Odessa. To do that, however, Russia would have to mobilize more forces and backstop more equipment, which Asia Time warns may stretch it too far. On the other hand, any war expansion would be, and I quote, daunting for Ukraine now that it is low on manpower and supplies. And the article ends this way. Zelensky may persuade Congress to ante up more money for the war, but this could also be his last hurrah. He may get a slimmed down package and then sent away. It is unlikely that he will return.